Alrighty, hi everyone. Today I'm going to be going over the key trends, accelerating technology adoption in higher education Horizon report. There are a lot of different trends discussed within this report, but the one I'm going to focus on was the midterm trend about redesigning learning spaces. And so the reason I chose this was because it really related to my undergraduate degree experience, because within that, I was in my second semester of college, and then COVID came, and we had to basically, not by choice, redesign how we learned because I had never really taken an online class. And so it was kind of hard to adapt to it. So I think doing a purposeful adaptation to learning, I think, is a great way to make it easier for people to learn on the go or wherever they are. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I read the 2020 Teaching and Learning edition, and I read a little bit about the trends. And I found one of the economic trends interesting because it talked about climate change and it highlighted how sustainable living is going to be a priority in the future for learning. And so online learning is, of course, a lot more sustainable, but one of the cons to that is that people who live in rural or under-resourced communities will struggle a lot more than others. And then it gave the example of California and how they have a lot of power outages. So it doesn't necessarily have to be super rural, but a lot of different communities just have different struggles that might put them in a worse place for that. Um, Another one of the trends that I looked at was one of the higher education trends. And I thought it was interesting that I mentioned that global fertility rates have actually decreased by 50% since 1960. So fewer students means more fiscal challenges. So college enrollment will drop as much as 10%. And I recall from another article that COVID actually made this a lot worse since it put people in financial situations that were a lot tougher. So less people were enrolling in college. And that was all I had.
Thanks, Larissa. My name's Mercedes, and I read the 2021 EDUCAUSE Horizon Report Teaching and Learning. I focused on the first trend I focused on was social, which looked at how remote and work learning widened the gap of the digital divide and mental health issues. It discussed how 2020, due to the pandemic, a lot of aspects of life, like socially, work, learning, and just normal daily tasks became just shifted very rapidly. And specifically, a lot of things turned virtual, even like work, education, and even simply like grocery shopping. You changed how you did that. So even though these shifts have occurred due to the pandemic, it talked about how a lot of them actually were for the better of the good and stayed in place in terms of remote and work learning abilities for families, and how these impacted both the students and the instructional staff to allow more access to education for students and allow them to access more work environments for instructors. But it also talked about how this did push students and instructors to adapt to these new learning methods and environments. And then the next topic I looked at was the digital divide. So it discussed how the pandemic significantly increased the need of relying on technology for work, education, and just general living. So with every increase of technology advance, we encounter there's always going to be individuals or generations that struggle with learning that new technology concept or the way to use it. So with those advances, the gaps became significantly evident with individuals that were not used to using technology prior to the pandemic. But on the other side of that, it also pushed a lot of people out of their comfort zone to become more technologic, more comfortable with technology in their day-to-day lives. And this especially did occur in like K to 12 schools and post-secondary schools and work environments as they heavily rely on the technology nowadays. And that's all I have to say.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So the reading that I chose was from the 2022 EDUCAUSE Horizon report, the Teaching and Learning edition. And the section that I read was the implications, what do we do now section. And so what this section covered was basically the higher education trends and issues associated with Australia, Canada, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, and the US. But the two sections that I found the most interesting were Saudi Arabia and Australia. So what was going on in Saudi Arabia is that they're facing three challenges in their higher education system. The first being the growing population of their youth. The youths make up 2/3 of their population. The second challenge that they're facing is unemployment. And unemployment is very high among the youth as well as the well-educated, meaning the people who have degrees. And the reason that this is happening is because the third challenge that they're facing, which is the skill gap. So even though these people have these degrees to help them get into these jobs, they necessarily don't have the skills. And so they end up doing really bad at their job. And so over right now at this time, like the publication of the report, at the time that the report was published, my gosh, I don't know, it was so hard to say. Saudi Arabia has 29 public and 36 private universities. And they're also facing the issue of not having enough instructors, and the pandemic made this even worse. However, the pandemic hit Australia really hard as well. So what was happening in Australia was that some students left for vacation. These students consist of international students as well as students that are native to Australia. So they basically left. And when the pandemic hit, Australia initiated their border laws to where no one could come in because of the pandemic. And what ended up happening is that these students were unable to come back and these Australian institutions were unable to provide education. So at this time, they didn't have any online learning at most of these institutions. And this caused them to lose money and they were facing financial hardships. And so overall, those are the two things that I found the most intriguing in that section. And that's all I have.